What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the 31 Days of Horror. I'm your host, Mood616, and thank you once again for stopping in, guys. Yes, 31 Days of Horror Volume 8, Day 8, coming at you live and direct as usual. And yeah, so we're going to take it back to 2006 with a film from India. I decided that I needed to, dip into that Bollywood horror box set for Mondo Macabro. And I hadn't watched anything out of it. And plus, I wanted to do a film from India. It was like the perfect opportunity, right? Trying to knock off those countries from around the world doing this 31 Days of Horror. And I was like, it's a perfect opportunity. So basically, I just picked one of the films at random. I had no idea about any of the movies. I'd never seen any of them before. I have seen a bunch of Bollywood films before, just not in this particular box set. So I just grabbed one out at random. It went into the randomizer, and this is the day it came up on. I think this might even be one of the newest ones from the box set, because I know they range from the 80s into the 90s into the 2000s, and this one's from 2006, so it's just kind of random. Directed by Deepak Ramsey, who actually, his family is very, very famous in India for doing a ton of films in the Bollywood realm. TV shows and stuff like that. So he's a very well-known director, which I don't personally know much about him, but I watched the intro on this, and apparently the family's very renowned for doing very well done, horror films and other types of genre films and stuff like that within India. So I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. I'm looking forward to this now, because I think the intro on the Mondo Blu-ray was like 6 or 7 minutes from this guy. And yeah. So anyways, the film in question here is from 2006, and it's called Aatman, translated to The Ghost, which I learnt by watching the intro that the translation for Aatma actually is not the ghost. The English translation for it is soul. So I was like, that is really strange. And he didn't really explain why they call it the ghost. I guess it's purposely just kind of misleading, because this one's a little bit hard to talk about if you're going into this thinking it's going to be a ghost film. So I'm not really too sure what that's all about, but it's very interesting that the translation is just not what it is. So anyways, quick little synopsis on this. Basically, this one follows our main character, Dr. Mihira. He is celebrating his year anniversary with his wife at home one night. Anyways, he hears a knock on the door, and ultimately there's this like really creepy dude at his door. And he basically says to the doctor, he's like, hey, so tomorrow when you go into work, you're going to perform a post-mortem on a body. I need you to put in your report that he died of poisoning. And the doctor looks at him like all reluctantly and says, I'm a doctor, like I'm not going to lie in my report. And then he says again to him, he's like, you need to do this. You need to put down that he died of poisoning, or shit's basically going to hit the fan. And he's like, okay, whatever. Fuck, slams the door in his face, goes on with his celebration. So he goes into work the next day, and he goes to do the post-mortem, the autopsy on this body, and it turns out it's the guy that was at his front door. And he's like, what the fuck? He's like, that's ridiculous. So he does the post-mortem, whatever, and he puts in his report, whatever he puts in his report. Anyways, to make things worse, these gangsters show up at his work, and they basically threaten him, and they say, hey, that post-mortem that you did on that body, we need you to change your report, or it needs to be in the report that he died of natural causes. And he's like, what the fuck? Like, I'm a doctor, I can't be doing this shit. He's very reluctant about it, but now he's being threatened by these gangsters. He feels threatened by this crazy person that was at his door, who's all apparently dead or alive, doesn't really know. So one thing leads to another, and he ends up getting paid off by the gangsters because they threaten the shit out of him. They threaten to, harm him or harm his wife and stuff like that. So he reluctantly takes the money. And now he's caught between a rock and a hard place, because he's a doctor, and he's lying on this, on these post-mortem reports about how this person really died and stuff like that. And then ultimately one thing leads to another, and some persons get possessed, and it just goes haywire from there. That's the short and long of the synopsis right there. I wanted to cut it off because I don't want to give too much away. This is a little bit a harder one to talk about without giving spoilers. I might have minor spoilers in here, but I've already said, like, right off the bat, this is not a possession, or this is not a ghost movie. It honestly, this movie is really bizarre, because if you know anything about Bollywood horror films or Bollywood films in general, they love to have, at the flick of a switch, change the tone in your films that you're watching, right? You'll be watching a film, so take this one in particular. The opening scene is fantastic, man. It's super fucking, like, it's horrific. It's got a great tone, horror tone, score. It's got, like, this craziness, horrorness. And then it cuts into, like, it feels like you're watching a fucking comedy. It's crazy. And then it, of course, jumps into, like, song and dance a couple times. And most of the song and dance numbers in this film happen within the first, like, there's 2 in the first 15 minutes, and there's 1 maybe just 10, 20 minutes down the road. But, like, the last hour and a bit of this movie is all straight horror. So if you can get through like the first 30 minutes of it, like it's got these tonal switches that are so bizarre, they're so jarring. I might use that word a lot in this because it really is jarring. If you've ever watched Bollywood films, it's super jarring. Like I said, you got one tone, it switches tones. It switches tones. Like there's a kung fu fight in the middle of the film right after this horrific horror scene, this crazy awesome possession scene in the beginning of the film. It's a total Exorcist ripoff, but it's a really cool scene actually. And then it just switches tones and then it goes right back into the horror realm. And you know, after you get the song and dance about like the backstory of what happened to this guy that died and stuff, it's really crazy fucking bizarre. Like the music is like, I always find myself going, oh yeah, it's like, I like Indian music, man, I think it's fun. But yeah, like the actual score to the horror film is really good, but it's also a big tonal switch from what you're hearing in the song and dance. It's really off-putting. And that's also what makes these movies kind of a little bit kind of a drag for me a little bit, because the runtimes in a lot of these Bollywood films are so long. This one runs 112 minutes and it's actually the shortest film in that box set. I think most of the films are actually like over 2 hours to 2.5 hours. So if you knocked off the 10 to 15 minutes of the song and dance, this one would actually be relatively probably under 100 minutes. So, you know, otherwise I think they kind of overdo it with the films sometimes. But, you know, getting back to the film itself, you know, going back to the title, The Ghost, I guess there is a ghost in the film, right? Because the guy that shows up at the house is ultimately the spirit of this guy that was murdered and, you know, stuff like that. But short and long of it, it's definitely like a possession film. I mean, it starts out as a possession film. It kind of, and then you don't really know where it's going. And then you're like, oh shit. Right? Because if you go back to what I said about the gangsters threatening her, and then this guy, you know, this guy that shows up at the door was threatening her. Yeah, because he ultimately wants revenge for his murder, and he, you know, proposed to, you know, this doctor to make it right. They didn't do that. Shit goes fucking haywire, and it turns into like this big possession, kind of like in the realm of The Exorcist and stuff, but actually really fun. Most of the effects in the film are practical. There is some CG with a head explosion, and there's a couple other moments and stuff like that. It's kind of like this mid-2000s CG, but I think it actually works, though. It's so strange because generally when I watch these type of films, if I see a little bit of CG mixed in with practical, it's not the worst thing in the world, but it has like this kind of elevated sci-fi feel to it with some of those scenes, and I'm like, oh yeah, it's very enjoyable. And I think what it is though too, because the actual aesthetic and the look of the film, it's shot beautifully. It looks really good. Like it looks really good. The acting is really good in this film. I think the editing is a little bit clunky. The music's really good, but with the effects being a kind of a mixed bag, it just kind of adds to it, man. It's honestly really fun. And, you know, going back to the runtime about it being 112 minutes, once it starts with the horror and kind of, you know, finishes up with that, it honestly rips by. There's a lot of things that are going on. There's a lot of characters that are involved, like I said, with these gangsters and what happened to this guy. It may be family related, and it's like all about greed, and like there's a whole pile of things that are happening within the narrative that I thought were actually pretty fun and interesting. It's definitely not a sleazy film. Like, it actually made me laugh. There's a scene where one of the characters, you know, it gets all like sexy and shit, and she gets into the pool and she's all, you know, taking her late night swim and stuff, and then the next thing you know, they show her in a shower and she's still got her bikini on. I'm like, oh, it's just not like North American or European filmmaking where that girl would have been naked in one of those two scenes, right? Not like that in this, man. In fact, I don't think I've really seen too many Bollywood films where it gets really sleazy. It's pretty interesting, and they're very clean too. There's not a lot of swearing. Like, their films are just different like that. They're totally different than European and North American type films. So, I mean, if you're on the fence about these type of films, I can see why, because when you throw the whole song and dance thing into these films, it off-puts a lot of people. I've talked to a lot of people that didn't pick up the box set because they're like, you know what, those Bollywood films aren't for me. But honestly, man, it's only little bits of the film, and then they generally play themselves out like what the genre is, kind of thing. So but yeah, really, really fun film. I think that honestly the kills could have been a little bit better in this film. You know, there was a couple off screen. There was one actual I guess the way this one girl dies, it came off as being, I don't know if it was supposed to be funny, but I actually laughed out loud. I was taking a drink and I almost spit it all over myself because it just, the way it happened, I was like, oh my god. It was just kind of funny. But all in all, man, it's really fun. It's fun, man. I think it's a really fun one. It's just super misleading. Not a ghost film. It's definitely more of a possession film, which you know, I had fun with. And one thing about this film that really caught me off guard, besides obviously the song and dance, but I mean, that is jarring, but I know that's coming. The editing was a little bit clunky at times, which I thought was really interesting because the film looks really good and it's very well produced, but the editing was clunky. It was very clunky at times. And I was like, that's really fucking bizarre to me. But the dialogue in the film was very, very strange to me because you would have tons of scenes where they're speaking the native Indian language, and then it would just, the odd line would be full English. Like, some of the characters actually were legitimately speaking English, like it was telling by their mouth, and then it would go back into Indian, and then it would go back and forth. The odd words would be like that and stuff, and it was like, and it wasn't a dub, like that was the track, and I was like, this is really bizarre, because I'm like trying to read the subtitles, also I'm hearing English, and I'm like, what the fuck? Like, it was jarring. It was more jarring than the song and dance for myself, because I mean, like I said, the first couple song and dance sequences aren't really that long. I think the third one's the longest one, which explains what happened to technically our ghost, our spirit, our guy that wants revenge, basically. It's like, it's crazy to tell a whole backstory in a song and dance. It's just thinking back on it, I'm just finding myself bobbing my head. It's ridiculous. It's like all choreographed dance and shit. It's ridiculous. But I had fun with this. I had a lot of fun with this, man. Definitely, I don't know if it's... I actually did hear somebody say that this may be their favorite or the best one in the box set. I don't know. I have to watch the rest of the films to find out. But this one wasn't a bad start anyways. So, I mean, if it turns out to be the best one, okay. I mean, it's not bad. Aatman, also known as the Ghost. I don't know. I'm going to give this one 7 out of 10. Definitely a fun one. You know, the 112-minute runtime, like I said, it could have been just under 100 minutes without those sequences. But then again, like I said, one of the sequences actually tells a part of a backstory, so that's pretty interesting. But yeah, cool stuff, man. Really enjoyed this. Oh, yeah, and the doctor's wife in this, she is so damn beautiful. Oh, my God. There's so many beautiful women in this movie. Like, it's just crazy casting. Crazy casting. It's awesome. Really good stuff. So Aatman from 2006, Indian film. That's going to do it here for day 8. Day 9 is... I can't remember what the film is for tomorrow. I believe we might be going from India to Spain. We're traveling, baby. We're traveling. So look out for day 9. And as usual...